Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. You're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well wherever you're joining us from this morning. Today we're going to be talking about the Breeding Wader EIP. It's an initiative. It's all about bringing farmers, advisors and researchers together to take control of one of the most pressing challenges facing our countryside, the decline of iconic breeding wader species. And we're delighted to be joined this morning by the project manager, Owen Murphy, and also we're joined by Ivan Kelly, who's an environmental specialist with Teagasc, who is going to assist with the questions later on. Good morning, Owen. You're very welcome back to the webinar. You're no stranger to the Signpost webinar.
Hi, Ivan. Thanks very much for having me. Pleasure to be here as always, and to meet people, even if electronically, to chat about waders and the pressures that are facing them. So thanks very much for having me.
You're very welcome. And you were saying earlier on, Owen, you're entering into a busy period in the project. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, well, I suppose when we're dealing with breeding birds, the vast majority of what we do, I suppose, pivots around the vital months of the breeding season, in particular for these birds. And I suppose as we'll go through in my slides, they're ground nesting birds, so particularly vulnerable to what happens while they're breeding. The rest of the year, post-breeding and pre-breeding, they can fly, so they have an ability to get out of the way of danger. When they're in egg or chick stage, they're really, really vulnerable. So a lot of what we do, as I said, pivots around what happens for the next number of months. Breeding season, I suppose, in earnest, what we would generally say is 15th of March into July, so we're getting into a really busy time when our birds are most vulnerable. So looking forward to the challenge as always.
Yeah, great. And good morning to you, Ivan. You're going to be helping us with questions later.
Yeah, good morning, Mark. Yeah, no, it should be. Looking forward to hearing Owen's talk. I know they're doing great work down there around the Shannon Callows and so on, so it'll be great to hear an update.
Great. Okay, Owen, I know you have some really nice slides to share with us, so we'll hand over to you and we'll chat to you after the presentation.
Perfect, and thank you very much. I think our timelines for this is approximately half an hour of having to listen to me, and then we'll take half an hour of questions. So I have quite a few slides. I'll rattle through them. So I suppose we start at the start, an EIP, and I think a lot of the listeners to the Teagasc Signpost series would be familiar with EIPs, but they're a European Innovation Partnership. I suppose innovation is at the centre of what we do, and to drive that innovation, the European Union, I suppose, when they were initially launching these, it's a more bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down. A problem is identified in an area. It's generally in relation to their EIP agri projects, or certainly this one is, and a lot of them that are in Ireland are. So something that happens on farmland that is problematic, and it can run. I mean, there's a huge array of what EIPs can cover, from animal health to a lot of different things. In this one, it's slightly different, that the decline in breeding waders was identified a number of years ago, and I suppose those of us working in the field have seen the decline in these ground nesting species for quite a long time, 30 to 40 years. And this, how do we assess, I suppose, the decline and then drive some recovery or stabilize wader populations? That can only happen if we have landowners on board, of course, and farmers, but also scientists, ecologists, and various other actors. So we will go through what makes up the Breeding Wader EIP. So it's a consortium of project partners that form what's called an operational group. The background, I suppose, to breeding wader decline is multifaceted, and that's one of the reasons why it's problematic. If we were looking at something that only happened from one particular source, or the pressure was coming from one particular area, you would imagine that it's easier to deal with. In our case, we have declines from mid-1980s of well over 90% in some of these species. Curlew, we're estimating at 98%. Dunlin, very, very high percentages. And even waders that we think in Ireland are still relatively plentiful, such as lapwing, who may have 800 to 900 pairs, 1,000 pairs maybe. They've still declined by 70% plus, probably 80%. So massive declines, catastrophic declines in breeding populations, and driven by a number of different things. So our intensification of agriculture, I suppose, is one that we talk about quite a bit on when we're discussing it with landowners. I think we all know, and anybody who's involved in farming, the changes that have happened since the mid-80s in farming have been have been, in all aspects. There's very little parts of farming that are the same as they were then. But in particular for these birds, the simple conversion of hay being the main fodder crop to silage, and the changing in timing. I mean, birds don't mind if you take a crop for silage or you take it for hay. If you knock meadow one way or the other, it's knocked. It's the timing at which you do it. And these birds, I suppose, have evolved, and the cycles of farming have coexisted very happily for many, many generations. The birds went down early in spring, laid their eggs. By the time we were knocking hay meadow late summer, these birds had fledged. The hay meadows were in good condition. We didn't use pesticide or herbicide. We didn't use artificial fertilizers. There was a lot of biodiversity. There was a lot of invertebrate populations. We hadn't reseeded. We hadn't drained a huge amount of land. So all those things cumulatively have put a lot of pressure on what these birds do in our farmed areas. But it's not only in our farmed areas. We've also had an afforestation policy. I seem to remember, again, going back to the mid-'80s when I was in school, I had a headmaster who liked to teach us lots of different general knowledge things. But I remember him saying something along the lines that Ireland had the lowest afforestation level in Europe at the time, somewhere over 4%, I think, which was really, really small. We probably have doubled that now, but we still have a policy that we need to get more trees into the ground. And of course, trees are good for a lot of different things. But our afforestation policies have primarily been focused on our marginal ground. We don't see large Sitka spruce plantations in prime dairy or tillage areas. And that marginal ground, these waders are waders by name and waders by nature. They like wet ground, they like wet areas. And these are the areas that we've focused our afforestation policies upon. Commercial and residential development has a certain knock-on effect. Floodplains and things outside towns that we would have built on and filled. Recreation, and this is one that we had written into our application for management of the EIP, thinking it was an issue, but since we've got up and running, it's actually a really, really big issue. There's no site that we work on, considering a lot of the sites we work on are high nature value and scenic areas, but there's none of them that don't have an impact from recreation. Our Arterial Drainage Act is one of these relics from the 1940s that nearly continues unchanged. The fact of the matter is that the Arterial Drainage Act has removed a significant amount of Ireland's wetlands, which prior to it were fairly pristine. So that's a removal of large amounts of habitat. And our commercial peat production, I mean, Ireland as a nation needed to bring itself forward. We needed power, and we decided to do that by use of bogs and the peat that were on them. I'm not saying that was wrong or that was this is what we needed to do as a state, I suppose, but the knock-on effect is that we removed thousands of hectares of fairly pristine bog. And again, these are areas that these birds were reliant upon. So the project team, established to try and understand the fundamentals of the decline and how we were going to stop that decline and halt it. Our project partners, our lead partner is Irish Rural Link, whose offices we work out of. They were brought on board because of their remit as a national body that are tasked themselves with keeping rural economies vibrant, a lot of skill in admin and finance. Myself as Irish Wildlife Services, Michael Martin, Agri-Environmental, who's a significant help to us in developing our payment plans and our farm plan structure. At ATU and the Hen Harrier project, University College Dublin, Dublin Zoo and Photo Wildlife Park make up the rest of the project team. The project duration is 5 years, so we'll work until probably the end of 2029, approximately, and it's a €25 million budget. Long-term aims will not be covered by this project. 5 years will not finish what is needed to happen for breeding waders on the ground. They're 40 or 50 years in decline. It will take 40 or 50 years of sustained work, in my opinion, to try and get them back to anything like favourable conservation status, which is basically that they do all right by themselves without a huge amount of intervention from humans. But our short-term aim has to be to halt the decline primarily, because we can only build on populations if we halt declines. So kicking on into that, I've covered some of these already, but improving awareness around breeding waders is obviously important. So we're doing quite a bit in that, and we'll go through that as we go through our slideshow. Driving population recovery on a national level as opposed to just site specific. So we've had some successful breeding wader projects in Ireland in the past working in specific areas. So what we're looking at this project is how do we scale those things up that they're national and I suppose that they're significant on national population levels. Increasing capacity in the predation risk management sector and the professionalism around that is huge. All our ground nesting birds need this, in my opinion. Predation is a huge issue for vulnerable species that have small numbers. We have high generalist predator populations in this country. So we need to try and rebalance and give our birds that are on the ground at their most vulnerable time a chance. We also develop collaborative approaches with loads of other people that are working in the same space or working on the same habitat types. Non-commercially farmed land is also within our remit, so it's not just farmland. We're doing quite a lot of research, and it's interesting. We'll go through that in a little bit of detail. And excitingly for me, we've been asked to drive policy and increase awareness among policymakers. So how do we factor the needs of these birds into policy going forward? If we don't, well, nothing will will change very soon after we stop. So even if we do great work and we get great results, unless it's mainstreamed in some way or there's funding available going forward, well, these birds will very, very quickly revert to the state that they're in prior to us starting. And that's sort of a waste of money, isn't it? These are species, 10 in total, which I mean makes it challenging. All waders, so they have a lot of things in common, but they also have things that they do differently and use different habitat types. I can't. We just don't have time to go in. They're a spectacular suite of species. Some really, really interesting facts about all of them, and that might be for another day. But they're the 10. The only, I suppose, breeding woodcock or breeding wader species that we don't deal with, or any wader species that breeds in any significance in Ireland, is woodcock, and they just use different types of habitat types, so they're not included in this particular project, beautiful and all as they are. So curlew, a main really, really iconic bird, blanket bogs, raised bogs, wet grasslands, was really, really common and was really iconic with people saving turf, knocking meadow. At certain times of the year, the call of the curlew is really evocative, but as we all know. The lapwing, Ireland's national bird, really important species because they're a very feisty species and they breed semi-colonially. You'll get a number of lapwing all breeding in the same area, and that sort of feistiness and their ability to defend themselves allows safe breeding conditions for other waders. So you often get other waders coming in at the back of successful breeding lapwing populations. So they're really, really important. I look at them as nearly a seed species for our breeding birds. For our breeding waders. Redshank, one of my favourite species in the world, iconic and synonymous, I suppose, with where I grew up on the Shannon Callows, a beautiful species. I'm just going to flick through these quickly. Snipe, as we all know, and I mean, one of the things we hear a lot of our gun clubs and gun club members talking about is snipe, and generally the amount of snipe that they missed as opposed to the amount of snipe that they shot. A really challenging quarry species and a beautiful species. Sky goats, as I heard locals call them around here years ago, because of that sound that they make on their breeding grounds. Oyster catcher, another one. Dunlin, huge declines in Ireland at the moment, only found in a handful of sites, and even in those sites the declines have been really, really large. Really iconic species. We get a lot of migratory Dunlin, like a lot of our other species. We get lots of these waders in during the winter, and they all go back to their breeding grounds, be that Iceland or Scandinavia or Scotland or further afield. And it's what remains behind is what we're interested in, because they're the birds that are vulnerable in an Irish species. And all these birds, I suppose, they're a nice word called philopatric. It comes from Greek, something along the lines of loving your homeland. But they go back to where they are. They're site faithful. So when you lose these birds from an area, you lose them. It's very, very hard to get them back in. Ringed plover, and some of these other ones that we'll go through, that we've never had full national surveys for them, so we don't have robust baseline data, which is another problem. Common sandpiper as well. As I said, I'm rattling through them. A redneck phalarope, sort of an unusual breeding wader species. We never had them in big numbers, but it's important we look after the small few that we have. One interesting thing about redneck phalarope is they spend quite a bit of time at sea, which is unusual for waders. But their migration from Ireland, we assume, is like the migration from birds that they tracked from the Shetlands. We had thought prior to that these birds would go to the Indian Ocean with a lot of the other phalaropes that breed in Europe. But lo and behold, we think they actually crossed the Atlantic and fly over Panama or somewhere and winter in the Pacific. So really, really amazing little birds. So on to our next slides. We broke up our areas that we work in, and these are indicative areas only. Doesn't mean we can work outside them. It's a national project, but the areas we're most likely to work in are our grassland for certain species, uplands for other species, and curlew. We just separated them out because we were following on from work done by the Curlew Conservation Programme and the Breeding Curlew EIP. And we have some maps here. So as I said, indicative maps doesn't mean these are the only places that we are working. But when we look at it, there's large parts of Ireland that we're not working in, and this is primarily because we don't have any of these birds breeding in them, and they would have bred in these areas in the past. So it's a sad indication of what we're up against. These are our upland areas. Again, we have lots more upland than this. Why do we not have more breeding waders in them? Because we have degraded habitat, I suppose, and this is our curlew. So curlew, I mean, some of the curlew mapping, well, it's in the red zones, and this would be curlew, and it looks like its range is quite okay, and there's numbers knocking around. But like when we look at Kerry and we look at Monaghan, these are single pairs of birds by themselves that are isolated from other breeding populations. So really challenging to work with. Conscious of time here, so I have to keep flying. So our work packages involve, I suppose, what we'll talk about here today, which is our breeding wader, habitat conservation, restoration, but a lot of other things as well. Head starting, predation risk management, informing our ag policy as we went through, and our outreach and education, our monitoring and our research. So the habitat enhancement itself is what we do on farmland, how we pay farm owners for implementing the management measures that we need to put in place. Head starting is taking eggs from the wild, which is an emergency measure that we do. We use our project partners in Fota Wildlife Park and Dublin Zoo to incubate our eggs. Their avicultural expertise is second to none. So they hatch them, rear them to a certain age. We bring them back to release facilities. We continue to rear them until they can fledge, and we let them go. So we've done curlew, following on some work that the Curlew Conservation Programme had done. And we last year did Dunlin, which was really exciting for us because Dunlin was only ever head started before in Sweden, and that was only a year beforehand. So we were the second time ever globally that Dunlin were head started, and we got 11 Dunlin eggs, hatched 11 Dunlin eggs, reared 11 Dunlin chicks, and released 11 Dunlin fledglings. So that was really, really exciting. Our nest protection and our associated predation risk management, that involves increasing the professionalism around nest protection, how we collect our data, and we're just about to finalise an accredited course, a level 6 accreditation for nest protection officers, and that will be those people who went through a robust training to prove what they can do and their understanding of the fundamentals of nest protection. Ag policy, as we talked about already, we need to change our land use and our planning policies to incorporate the needs of these birds. Our collaborative initiatives is huge. A lot of people working on the ground, and we have a slide about that. Public outreach, and look, I just don't want to repeat myself for the time that's going, but this is the collaborative part, and it's our, I suppose, our hashtag for everything that we do. We need to collaborate. We won't change the fortunes of breeding waders by ourselves. We will only do so by working with all, and we could have missed some people when we look at this, but huge amount of people working in environmental and biodiversity and on farmland, and we need to talk to them all, and we all need to be pushing in the right direction. Farmers and landowners obviously central to that, but also NPWS and Department of Ag staff and projects, other organisations such as Teagasc, Irish Grey Partridge, NARGC, Birdwatch Ireland, other projects, Corncrake Life and Macker, the list goes on and on, angling groups and all that. So collaboration is essential. And you push collaboration and you push outreach through media. So our media presence has been strong. We've been very happy with the uptake of it, and we've been, really appreciative that, like the Farmers Journal, Ear to the Ground, RTE, regional and local newspapers who have all engaged with us and given us airtime. So that's sort of a comms dashboard, and I suppose this comes back to something that we're doing in the background. We're collecting data. We have a GIS unit that are highly, highly capable and can put together these dashboards that are live and real time for us, so we can manage in real time, and that's data from all aspects, whether it's breeding wader data, nest protection data, comms data. It doesn't matter, we have it in real time, and we can make what we hope are informed decisions going forward in relation to the management. The wader action plan, the payment structure for landowners, it's made up of 5 different aspects. In the background, the front end is that a landowner gets one payment, but the payment is broken down thus, and that is, there's a collaboration payment for allowing the project to happen, for attending training days, and agreeing to terms and conditions. There's a wader management plan, that we'll flick through and give brief outline of. There's a wetland for waders payment that we separated out at the start because we wanted landowners to realise and put value on the wetland area, because that's what the birds value. There was a desktop study done of European wader projects, and those that didn't address waders' need for water weren't successful. So instead of somebody looking down at a wet area in the ground and saying, how do I get rid of that? They can look down at it and say, well, actually, that particular piece of wet ground is getting me 800 euros a year, or getting me 1,200, or getting me 2,000 euros a year, whatever the case may be, and it becomes valuable, and they end up looking down at it and smiling and liking, as opposed to tearing their hair out to say, where can we put in pipes, or where can we drain it to? Our capital actions are very similar to other capital actions. We're not reinventing the wheel when it comes to what we need to do on the ground for waders. And then we have a wader bonus payment, and that is for, incentivizing people to keep upgrading their habitat type in relation to waders. So our collaboration, our access, our engagement, our training, our data collection, head starting, drone searching, any of those things that we need to do on ground to drive wader recovery, that's allowing us to do it. Our wader management and protection plan payment, and Michael Martin and Rosemary, who works for Michael Martin, was vital in coming up and structuring this in such a way. Their experience in dealing with these sort of things. But livestock units during the breeding season, one livestock unit or less for those who are grazing, those who are knocking meadow, restrictions during the breeding season, no use of pesticides, herbicides, or anthelmintics on the ground. We like to dose reactively. We're not saying to people you can't dose an animal, but send off your dung sample. We'll pay for fecal egg counts. If they're high, well, then you can put in place dosing. So it's saving farmers money as well. Instead of dosing by calendar and saying we have to dose them if a beast doesn't need to be dosed, well, you don't dose them. Farmers can also get paid for trapping, fencing, data collection, and various other things. This is a wetlands for waders payment. This is actually a bog site, a Bordemona bog site that was in commercial peat production 7 years ago. So look at the recovery here. We have a little bit of work to do on scrub in the foreground, but lovely wet pools, low grass areas, bare areas. So we have lapwing, we have redshank, we have common sandpiper, ring plover, all breeding on this ground. So it goes to show when you put in the wetlands, these birds will react, and back it up with our nest protection and our data collection. This is capital actions on the ground. This is a lovely wader scrape down in the Shannon Callows and Charlie Killeen's. So that's what a wader scrape is, a low shallow depression. There was already an existing slough in this field that we just enhanced. Pull it right out. No reason why this can't be still grazed during the summer, or even with gradients that are this shallow, you could still knock meadow off it. Mulching and sward management, scrub removal, temporary fencing, and other things are in our list of capital actions. And a wader bonus then for things like openness and connectivity, really important for these birds, and sometimes not factored into other payment schemes. And of course, in the background, we have to go through our checks with the Department of Ag and NPWS Farm Plan scheme to show that we're not double paying for any of these things. These are what our dashboards look like. So far we have, this is a few weeks old, but we had 384 expressions of interest. We had 146 signed farm plans. We now have 170 because we have a press release going out, I think, next week. And these, it's invaluable what we can see in our dashboards. We can manipulate the data by zooming in and out. So a wonderful resource to have. This is our capital action. So we're only really getting going on our capital actions. 116 proposed, 19 delivered so far. And I suppose they will ramp up after this breeding season as we come into this autumn. Our research is really interesting. John Byrne is working closely with ourselves on the project, working as part of the project really, and James Moore and our project partners down in ATU on our policy. And so far, I mean, we've produced a draft of a measure for the nature restoration plan, and that's been assessed at the moment, which is really, really exciting. And we'll also look at how we can get policy documents into cap negotiations, so on and so forth. Andrew Ryan is doing work on genetics for us. We have Emily Marsh doing pasture management and invertebrate populations in different types of pasture and management types. And Emil Robertson is doing some work on adaptive predator management. And we're just in the process of looking, we're just getting the equipment in. It should be in a couple of weeks, into tracking foxes. So GPS tracking foxes on ground that we're working on to see how they interact with habitat type. See, length of duration of hunting, does weather affect their hunting patterns? Loads of different things that we need to know that we don't know. We haven't never undertaken these surveys on agricultural land or this research in Ireland. that's just a suite of beautiful photographs of these beautiful birds and their eggs. So we have curlew eggs, we have a Dunlin fledgling in the center top, we have a lapwing fledgling in the top right, oystercatcher eggs on ground that we cleared and mulched for scrub last year. So within a few weeks of us stopping work, we had birds that previously had not used this area in using it on an island in Loughree. So that is just testament to the fact that putting in place the habitat type, backing it up with our nest protection, our robust and professional nest protection, and surveying thereafter allows us to come up with the results that this works. And that building on, of course, lots of work that others did in the past, both NPWS and Birdwatch and various other people. Curlew fledglings, and you can see their leg flags on the bottom. So these are GPS head-started curlew that we're releasing again on an island in Loughree. And that's a picture probably biased towards Loughree because a lot of these photographs are my own. That's, redshank fledglings on Loughree. So look at absolutely spectacular birds. Let me see, what do we have next? In relation to our wader sightings, we surveyed with 252 distinct. There's methodologies for surveying waders that we follow. So 252 wader survey areas last year, 3,300 wader sightings, and these are our maps. And again, we can manipulate that to go through species, type, so on and so forth, and zoom in and out to where we need to be. So this is a really, really useful tool. And we're hoping we're going to build on this 26, 27, 28, 29, also feed international surveys for some of these species that we will work collaboratively with the NPWS on delivering. And it's really, really exciting because these are robust data sets for species that we would have had minimal enough data before, certainly on a national level. Again, that's just showing the different mapping types we can do, and we can overlay that. So say if we wanted to see where are we working in relation to Ramsar sites, well, Ramsar sites are shape files, and we just overlay them with our shape files. For those of us, I'm not claiming to know how to do these things very quickly, but those of us that work on the project that do, if we ask for this data, they have it sent back to us in a few minutes, and we can get the ball rolling very quickly. That's for those of the people that wouldn't have seen it. This is what ecological data set sort of looks like. These are distinct areas that we asked to survey, and this is the bog that we had looked at that I had said recovered. So this is still the aerial footage of the bog. So you can see there was nothing on it, bare piece. And now look at the birds that are using it because the habitat type has changed and because they're getting some help from us in relation to predator management. These are the sort of data sets that we produce. I think I'm nearly on my half an hour mark, so I'm going to wrap it up in a minute, but we're getting standard estimates, and these estimates will become more precise as we go forward. We also add in incidental reports outside of, or we can add in incidental reports. So we have a lot of nest protection officers. We had 40 nest protection officers working on contract last year that are looking at these birds in the field on a daily basis or on a nightly basis. So they are incidental data sets, but we can also include them. And we should include them, but we need just state when they've been included, so that we can differentiate between the two. But it adds to our knowledge, and we can break it down by county. So we see some counties doing fairly well with Donegal, and I suppose Galway, Mayo, Roscommon, Longford, and Westmeath topping the bill. But again, where the species are and within those counties where they are, and then we can do productivity, which is something that we have very little data on it for waders, certainly on a national level so far. And again, this is really early in the project, so we're not passing too much heat on these productivity figures, but we're showing that we can extract this information from our data sets. Head starting a little bit of data on it in relation to curlew, 35 eggs last year, and we can see what was released. We also have some tracking data on where they're going, and look at. That's it. I had loads more that we could have squeezed in. But look, always feel free to reach out. Anybody who's listening that wants more information on anything that we are doing or where these birds are going or what we're trying to achieve. We have, thanks to our communications manager, Karen, who has just, exceeded all expectations in what we're doing in relation to our website and our outreach. We also have a newsletter that we just published this week that I hope can be shared to anybody who wants it, who is on the call as well. But lots of resource there, and our email addresses is there, and obviously mine is there in front of you as well. So feel free to reach out at any stage. I'll chat about waders till the cows come home. So that's me. Happy to take any questions. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much. Yeah, a lot of information packed into a very short space of time there. And do check out the breeding waders.ie website, where there's lots and lots of information there. A lot of questions coming in there, Owen, about the the use of access to that data that you presented there, is that publicly available?
Some of the data we will, yeah, and it will be publicly available. And there is other data such as, nest locations and some of these things that probably won't be shared immediately or reactively, just for common sense reasons. But a lot of the data will be publicly available. Yeah, I don't have a link to it now at the moment, but it's something that we're working on.
Great. Just at the outset there, Owen, you talked about feeding into the policy side of things. I mean, is there a wish list that you have from a sustainability point of view of the waders, given that these EIPs are a defined period and you want to have a legacy left afterwards? What would you like to see coming out of the project from that point of view?
Yeah, there certainly is. I mean, the mainstreaming of some of the actions that we're implementing, I suppose, is a fundamental. And there are certain things that, and I suppose this is where the complexity of it comes in. Some of the things that we're dealing with, such as we're writing a land management agreement for a landowner to implement, those sort of things fit nicely into what Department of Ag are already delivering through acres. So, I mean, there's a possibility that some of those things will be subsumed and they'll be written into future iterations of acres, which has happened in the past for various different things. But there's also things that are fundamental to breeding wader recovery and that stabilizing of breeding wader populations, such as nest protection, head starting, ecological data, and this sort of stuff that doesn't. So I suppose from a policy point of view, and I mean, we're still early enough in this project. We launched in May 2024, and of course the first X amount of months is taking up with trying to develop a team and your systems and so on and so forth. But now that we're getting down to the sort of nitty gritty of it, is, how do we bolt on the additionality that's needed beyond just a land management agreement to somebody, because you can't expect a landowner to farm land and implement professional standard nest protection or collect eggs for head starting or collect ecological data to the standard we need. So where do they fit in? So, putting on sort of additionality in regards to floating teams maybe that work within different aspects of agri-environmental schemes on a larger scale. So it is complex, and we're trying to finalize exactly what we're asking for, because there's no point going to policymakers and saying, well, with a wishy-washy sort of an ask,
course, yes.
You need to nail down what you're doing. So we're in the process of doing that. But that's my initial assessment, is that, mainstream those things that need to be mainstreamed, and then fund from whatever resource that is there, a commitment to fund the additionality that you need to because it's not just waders. We look at hen harriers, we look at red grouse, we look at Irish grey partridge. They're all ground nesting birds, and they're all very, very vulnerable, and they will all need help going forward. And some of those head starting nest protection things, could be applicable to all of them, from corncrake to redshank.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and I think if any measures, of course, need to be accompanied by that support network, or whether it's expertise or whether it's the actual machinery that's required to do what's needed. You mentioned also the importance of predator control, or that is a significant pressure on breeding waders. That's a big challenge, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is, for a number of different reasons. One, it's challenging to implement. It takes a lot of resource, and it takes highly skilled individuals. It's also emotive for certain sectors of society, because some of the species that we're removing are native species. So, like, our 4 species that we really concentrate on are mink, fox, grey crow, and magpie. So mink, obviously a non-native invasive species, and that generally sits very well with people. There's certain sectors that just don't agree with it, fundamentally don't agree with it, and we don't get into big arguments. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, but they are an invasive species. We did some work, or I was on a working group earlier in the year to try and get the mink onto the invasive alien species list of union concern, which has happened. So from 2027, member states will have some sort of extra work to do in the space of mink, which is great. Prior to that, I mean, there was still some mink fur farms, and there was a little bit of a clash between what we knew was bad for biodiversity and the economic returns from mink farming. So that has been put to bed. So that they're okay. But fox are a beautiful native animal. They're just, we have huge populations of foxes at the moment. They're extremely adept at what they do. We have created a landscape for them over which they can hunt very readily. I mean, I've spent hundreds of hours amazed at night watching foxes through thermal or night vision. And I mean, for any of us who shoot or watch gun dogs quartering over and back, they do the exact same thing. So if you give them wide open, dry or relatively dry ground, they'll just quarter it over and back. They may miss a nest one night, but like curlew are sitting on eggs for 30 plus days, and then their chicks are on the ground for 34 plus days. So, I mean, a fox will not miss a curlew nest out of that field for 60 days in a row or 70 days in a row. So these birds have very little chance with high fox populations. We're not saying there's no place for fox in the Irish countryside. We just need to decide where are we focusing on waders and try and give them a chance in those areas. Grey crows, obviously very clever birds, beautiful species to watch in the wild. They obviously do quite a bit of damage for people that are farming sheep in particular. But like, you know, you get certain grey crows that turn on to eggs at certain time of the year, and you will come across their perches, and there could be 60 or 70 broken eggshells underneath that perch. You know, they become really, really good at what they're doing. And magpie very similarly as well. You know, magpies corvid family member as well, and they will take chicks and eggs. So it's something that is challenging to implement, but we need to do it in a certain way that is professional, it's ethical, and it's humane. So like, we have come up with ways we've changed certain trapping techniques. We're using a lot of trap sensors that will alert us instantly when a trap goes off. So even if an animal is trapped, and even if that animal is going to be humanely dispatched, it's only in that trap for a very, very short space of time, because we're going and we're dealing with it because we know the trap have gone off. So a suite of measures like that. And of course, our course, really, really exciting for those of us that have worked in that predation risk management sector for a long number of years. This course goes through proficiency in shotgun loose, proficiency in rifle, proficiency in trapping, fieldcraft techniques and legislation and licensing, and really excitingly, a really comprehensive ecological module of 12 weeks of 3-hour lectures delivered through ATU, so that our nest protection operatives on the ground understand the ecology and of the birds that they're protecting and of the species that they're removing from the landscape. So like, this hasn't been done in Ireland before. It's something that we're really proud of and really excited about, but it is challenging nonetheless. And on a landscape level, to get the policymakers and the decision makers in Ireland to understand that, you know, implementing nest protection and saying we're doing nest protection as part of a project, but giving one nest protection officer an unrealistic amount of ground to cover means that you never get to do it to the threshold that it makes any difference. So we need to be focused, and we need to be structured in what we're asking somebody to do, and say, well, there's, you know, cumulatively there's 2,000 acres. If we go to 4,000 acres, this one operative cannot do 4,000 acres to the standard that's needed, or to the level that is needed, that will have a fundamental difference for productivity on the ground. And that is something, again, we will be presenting through policy to say, this is the level of funding that we need for nest protection to work.
Yeah, so active management is required, and actually we saw that same message coming through from our colleague from Caffrey there a couple of weeks ago. Nicola Warden was talking about that importance of predator management, and that has delivered significant benefits for the estate up there in Antrim. Ivan, lots and lots of questions coming through. So Owen, you've obviously stimulated a lot of interest this morning, and a lot of compliments coming through on your slides and the lovely photographs that you have taken yourself.
I see a comment here. It probably sums it up. Great presentation and great project. So that 4 or 5 words summed it up well. Just one for myself, Owen, and there's a lot of questions to get in, but I'm just thinking about your comments there regarding foxes and about site-specific management issues. But I suppose when we think about biodiversity, we sometimes, you know, try to give broad messages that are good for biodiversity, you know. And I'm thinking in your case, we might talk about from a hedgerow from a point of view of carbon, or from the point of view of biodiversity, you know, bigger and taller and so on. And then maybe you need different types of management, we'll say around pollinators and that type of thing. But do we have a clear plan in this country, I suppose, on how to manage our landscape for the wide variety of needs of all biodiversity, and in your case for the breeding waders? Do you think that there's enough done in that area?
Yeah, I don't think so, but I do think it's an extremely challenging thing to set about doing, because if you come up with a land use policy that says, well, in this area, we're focused on afforestation. In this area, we're doing something else. It sort of shoehorns that area into it, and you will have other habitat types or species types that invariably will suffer because of that decision, because not everything coexists perfectly well with other things. But in saying that, I think it is necessary. I mean, we need in certain instances to decide, well, this is what's happening with this area because it is so important for such and such. And I mean, I think all conservation projects that I know of, there is no such thing really as a single species conservation project. There are co-benefits and there are knock-on benefits, no matter. So in our instance, if you look at what we're trying to do for breeding waders, we are hoping that it has a positive impact on the breeding waders themselves, but it also has a positive impact on grassland and biodiversity within grassland. It has positive impact on water and water retention on ground that should be wetland, and the associated benefits with flood mitigation and carbon capture of doing so. So there's a suite of other things that go on. I mean, if your question is is it taking the shape that, right, this area is for breeding waders and therefore you can't do other things within that zone? And likewise, if there are breeding waders in another area and that has become an afforestation zone, well, then you don't factor in those waders in that area, and therefore those waders are sort of up to their own devices. If they survive, they survive. If they don't, they don't. It may be the stage that that's the most sensible thing to do, because then everybody knows what's happening. But there will have to be, there will be kickback to doing that, insofar as whoever's living in an area won't want to see a certain habitat type or species be lost because of an overarching policy that this area is more suitable to whatever. So it's a really, really complicated project, and I've talked to colleagues and friends in the UK who are talking about similar things as well. They have large forestation in parts of Scotland that curlew were or are in fairly big numbers in, and if the deforestation continues, the curlews will obviously decline. And they're talking about, are we better off just giving up that area and saying, well, actually, okay, that should be afforested, but then there's a commitment given that this other area is never afforested because this is where there's other things. So, I mean, I don't have the answer to it, but I do know that the needs of the different habitat and species types need to be factored in, and there needs to be some sort of a decision made on a landscape level, if not, regional or county level, but certainly and landscape obviously can mean different things to different people. But, a landscape at its smallest is a collection of townlands or parishes together. And what happens, because we do see that you have some wide open landscapes in Ireland that have been severely impacted by small blocks of say forestry within them. And is the value of that forestry enough to be putting pressure on that wide open landscape and all the other species and habitat types that need either no drainage or wide open landscape types? So that there are questions that I suppose need to be discussed, and at some stage in the future you would imagine answers need to be found for them, but I just don't have them today.
I think you answered it well, and I think, I suppose the bottom line is it is complicated, and it does require a lot of thought, but sometimes I think we oversimplify messages, maybe, on the broader picture, that we do need to zone into what is best, and do we, as you said, do we need that there might be trade-offs. Sometimes there might be trade-offs, and that's important. A few quick ones. We have a lot of questions, so I'll try and group some of them together as best I can, but maybe just it ties in with what we've just covered there. But is there potential for some of these actions, I think you've answered it on waders, helpful for water management, such as slow water movement? And has there been any collaboration or discussions with the likes of ASSOP and catchment managers? So that I know there's the Waders EIP and so on, that different bodies are working together.
Yeah, slow in the flow, I suppose, is a concept that I certainly personally believe in hugely. And I see, growing up on the Shannon Callows, my home parish in Clonown, Drum Clonown, flooding has got significantly worse over the last 30 or 40 years. And my own opinion, a lot of that has to do with that we've, the Shannon catchment is huge. When you drain land, the water just doesn't disappear. It goes downhill, and it ends up in our case on the Shannon Callows. So a combination of factors: increased rainfall, the building of Ardnacrusha, I suppose, going way back to 1929. But that, what's the difference between 1960, when Ardnacrusha was built, and now? Well, we have more rainfall and it's becoming more extreme, but we've also drained significantly more land. and that water is ending up at the bottom. So that slow the flow concept is something I hugely believe in, and it's good for a lot of other things as well. I've certainly had lots of discussions with people working in the space of water. Now that I suppose our systems are set up, and that we're starting to roll out our farm plans and our project offices are in place and our data collection and our screening and our CRM are all sort of up and running. It's now time, I suppose, for us to power on with that collaboration. And I'm certainly hopeful that discussions, I suppose, provisional discussions that I've had with the like a Law Pro and various people will become, partnerships in some degree. I mean, we're working closely with Bord na Móna on certain sites. We've had discussions with Coillte, ESB. I'm actually meeting Irish Rail, who owns some ground along the Shannon Callows. So we're open for collaboration. And if anybody has any ideas, I mean, just reach out to us if we haven't reached out to you already.
I think that's really good. And I suppose, as you said, you're just really starting to get into it now, and you've got a lot of the initial infrastructure that had to be developed is up and running. A few short ones maybe. Are the eggs used for head starting taken from failed nesting sites?
No, not from failed nesting sites. We would have a sort of a system for selecting sites. If an egg or if a nest of eggs is extremely vulnerable, that is one of the criteria in which we will take eggs. But we are selecting eggs. Our national policy, and I mean, we had a lot of discussions with NPWS and others in relation to this, is that we need to look at curlew and dunlin on a national level. And how best to do that, we have, robust predictions and modelling done on how head starting can affect breeding population going forward. So we need to sort of try and get over a critical amount of eggs. Head starting a very small amount of eggs, will have small impact, but in order to actually impact the national population, we'd like to be doing 30 plus, 40 plus eggs per year. So basically we're selecting eggs upon sites that may be most vulnerable, and then others from areas that we believe that there's a population that can sustain it, and then others from areas that we believe that it's really, really problematic to sustain a population in for a lot of different reasons. So there's a lot of criteria that we take. What I always say to people is we don't just take eggs and walk off the pitch. These birds will relay. So we have dates early in the breeding season which we try to take eggs, after which then we continue to survey, we continue our nest protection efforts, and we continue our land management. So we're hoping that the second clutches will be laid and the second clutches will get away. So it's not taking eggs from an area and leaving the birds alone to their own devices. We're continuing with the exact same effort as if those eggs were still in situ. So we're hoping to get a double clutch away. But the modelling shows that if we don't do something really, really an emergency measure for curlew, we won't have them in another 10 or 15 years as breeding species in Ireland. So that would be a really, really sad state of affairs. So as I said, it's an emergency measure. None of us like walking out into a field and taking wild birds' eggs out of a nest. Not a great feeling, but there is a good feeling when you release those fledglings back into a wild environment. And from our GPS tracking of curlew and from ringed and resightings of dunlin, we're seeing that these birds are getting themselves and re-establishing themselves back into wild populations very quickly.
Yeah, no, it's just necessary for the greater good, I suppose. If your land is in a dry area, question here, with no waders or wetland birds, but it floods seasonally, can you join the programme or put a plan in place to permanently flood or part flood the land and create a new habitat for waders? I know your focus is on the existing one, but what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, everything is possible, and we don't. There's never a silly inquiry. Anybody can inquire from us at any stage. Some of the things that, some of the people that we've had to say, well, at the moment we can't service, is just geographic location. I mean, our strategy from the start was to focus on areas that have some remnant of a breeding wader population at the moment. Set out our stall, I suppose, and get ourselves trained up and decide what we need to do and put in place all those measures we've already talked about, and then build out from those sort of core areas or those nuclei of breeding birds. So say if somebody comes to us and they say we're in Kilkenny, well, at the moment we just can't service somebody at Kilkenny because we don't have a project team, we don't have nest protection officers down there, we don't have a project officer to call out and walk the land. I mean, every farm plan that we write, we've met the landowner, we've walked the land, we've assessed what they're doing. So I mean, it's an involved process. But we don't turn around to people and say we will never incorporate that. We just need to get ourselves right. And I suppose these really, really important areas for breeding birds, try to turn the tide there. And I mean, this year's data set, I'm hoping, will start to show, well, is what we're doing on these certain areas having effect, even this early in a project?
I see one here that I suppose it does come back to the crux of what you talked about earlier on policy. And just before, in case we don't get to it, would you be concerned about the EU policy shift towards competitiveness, where nature conservation biodiversity seems to be downgraded? Thinking particularly about well, it says no life program, but I suppose that the life program is what is now incorporated, I think, into the proposals or under the European Competitiveness Fund. So rather than a standalone project. But all of these signals, are you, like you mentioned, that this will require 40, 50 years to get to get stabilization and so on. What are your thoughts around
you have to be there? Yeah, you have to be concerned, really, don't you? Because I mean, the geopolitical situation at the moment is sort of in a little bit of flux, and between spending on defence and a lot of other things, that there's the same pot of money, but more hands going in to grab. So something has to give. I mean, I was at the CAP Consultative Committee meeting yesterday, and I mean, I suppose everybody is concerned not only in the reduction in possible funding for the Like a Life projects and agri-environmental schemes and the rest, but I mean, the overall reduction in CAP budget means that there's now less money to share around. So you have a nature restoration plan that I'm hoping will be really robust, but we have to find where is that getting funded from, how much is getting funded to the tune of. Again, try and align that things that are happening on an agri-environmental or a biodiversity side of CAP will be complemented by NRP. The one isn't replacing the other, that there's a cumulative net gain to what we're trying to do. So I am concerned, and not ring fencing budget, I suppose, is the real concern for me, because if you get a government that is so inclined, they may push a really, really strong biodiversity and nature related agenda. But likewise, you can vote people in that don't have that same aspect. And right, they may do the bare minimum that they need to do in order to, to fulfill whatever European directives are there, or what they need to do. But there would be no real ambition. I mean, what we need to do is the like of our broad agri-environmental schemes like acres and our NPWS farm plans and all these other things, they need now to be enhanced, in my opinion, and driven on. Of course, I'm biased because this is the area that I work in, and I love the birds and the species that we look after. But I'm also very clued into the needs of farmers, and I grew up in a parish with friends that are farmers and still are farmers. So I mean, we need to do things that are complementary. And we need to assess the needs. And I mean, a lot of these things, we can aspirationally say it's great if everybody cares about nature and we all do these things, but we need funding. We need funding to deliver all the things that we've just talked about in this presentation, but also all the other suite of agri-environmental things that we're trying to do, such as rehabilitation of bogs.
Sorry, it was a delay there. Just on the land management side, we'll say, if Mitch is here, one of the questions that you talked a good bit about the capital initiatives, but from the land management activity, what can farmers expect when managing breeding waders, such as grazing modifications, etc.? Maybe I'll lump it with another question just so we get through them. There was one there on stocking rates and so on. That could there be a conflict around nitrates or farmers' requirements? Is there somebody overseeing that the management requirements aren't in conflict with some other scheme or that's there for a farmer?
Yeah, well, I mean, we did have a good look at all this, and I suppose the expertise, as I've already mentioned, of the like of Michael Martin and some of our project partners. But I mean, we do have a strategic oversight committee on which the Department of Ag sit and the NPWS. So we've gone through this in detail, and we don't believe there's conflict in what we're asking to do in relation to other schemes. We have a couple of small things that there's a reduction in a management payment for. Things like if somebody's in geese and swans, they're already getting paid for the month of March, or maybe the month of March and half of April. And we just can't pay for similar management on that same parcel of land for that particular period. But I mean, the overall scheme of things, it doesn't affect anybody's overall payment very much. So we factored that in relation to stocking rates and stocking densities. I mean, this is the crux of the matter, and basically decides whether a farmer can opt in or decides it's not for them. But we go through it in detail and we say, well, that parcel of land that is your wader related parcel, I mean, can you hold stock off that or reduce the stocking rate on it? I mean, the beauty about it is that in an ideal world, right, you have a low stocking rate during the breeding season, or if somebody wants to leave it, that there's no stock on it during the breeding season, and then graze it fairly heavily thereafter. So you have that low sward going in, and you have a bird laying eggs on relatively bare ground, the grass and the vegetation starts to grow up as those birds are incubating. By the time the chicks are around, there's a little bit of cover from the grass, but the sward isn't that thick and heavy and butty that wet, heavy, rank sward, not rank sward, but that real heavy sward. Chicks will get very wet trying to get through that to feed, because you're talking about chicks that you'd hold in the size of your hand, really small little wader chicks, and they need to feed really on a really abundant food source of insects. So they need to be able to operate and get around their nesting area. So that sort of sward growing up in tandem with them growing up is what you're looking for. So that stocking rate for that particular time, or knocking meadow, and another thing that that some farmers just find it either doesn't fit into their system, or they need to put in some thought and effort into how to manage it, is that can we leave that meadow, that you're not knocking it until post breeding season. And in most instances, you can get around it because the payment structure makes up for the inconvenience, or for the management that needs to go into either moving stock or bringing in machinery later on in the season, so on and so forth.
No, and I think yeah, there's a lot there, and maybe just I'm conscious that there's a lot of questions have come in, and just that the time is really tight. But what I would say is, I think Mark mentioned earlier, there's a lot of good information on your website, and I think Mark has put the link for that up in the chat.
Put the link in there.
I think it'd be really important that people have some really good, interesting questions. As you said, you are available, but it could be a good starting point for.
Well, I mean, if these questions, if I can see them post this session, I mean, I can answer people. I will get back and answer people. If you just leave it with me.
We can forward the questions on. No problem. It might be difficult to make contact with individuals, but we certainly can inform our future content for webinars as well. I know there's a huge amount of interest in this morning's topic. So, given the numbers that we have on today, and I think opportunities. I'm sure you're taking on to engage with those people that are going out onto farms, the likes of advisors, and department staff and so on. It's just, I suppose, there's an education piece there about developing the better understanding of what these birds need and the habitats that are required. Unfortunately, we're right out of time. So thanks for allowing us to have lots of time for questions there, because there's unfortunately we didn't have enough time to get to them all, but huge interest in this topic, Owen. So a lot of well wishes on the project, and you've certainly got good media coverage. So your communications officer is doing good things there. So it's important. It's really important to get those messages out, isn't it? But thank you, Owen, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning. Ivan, thanks very much for helping out with the questions. Next week, we're going to be joined by Brian Nicholson, who is a farmer. We're also joined by Minister Michael Healy-Rae, who's going to be talking to us about integrating agroforestry on Irish farms. So we're going to have a very special studio session for that session next week. We'll also be joined by a number of forestry specialists and Teagasc advisors. So do join us for that next week. Until then, take care. We'll see you next week. You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.